Butterfly Learning Center to hear butterfly expert Drake White tell us about monarchs and migration. Before we get started with that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Phil Harbinger Park Conservancy. We are a nonprofit that supports activities in Phil Harbinger Park. And if you enjoy programs like the one that we have today, please consider going to our website and donating something or becoming a member. We are a member-based nonprofit that, those funds go directly to providing these type of programs free to the public. Our website is www.philharbingerpark.org. And now I'm going to let you hear from Drake.
Good morning, and thank you for tuning in today. Today we are going to talk about monarchs and migration. And at any point that you have questions, feel free to go in and type those out and ask those questions, and I am happy to answer those. You don't need to wait for me to finish anything that I'm speaking about to ask a question, and I'm happy to answer. So we're going to get right into things, and we're going to talk about migration of monarchs. And that's basically one thing that we know is that this is the only butterfly that we know of as of yet that does a two-way migration just like birds. So they are right now coming through San Antonio is a part of the Texas funnel, which brings them down the corridor of 35 all the way from Canada to Mexico, and they end up in the Sierra Madre Mountains in Michoacan, Mexico. This happens twice a year, so they're now during fall they go down, and then they overwinter, and then they wake up, they mate, and they start their journey back in spring. And so it's basically wherever, if you want to kind of come in so they can kind of see here, wherever they're at over here, everything just kind of funnels down through, and they end up down here in Mexico. If you live up somewhere near Canada, Missouri, Michigan, places like that, your migration will actually start roughly around August. And then they start to just come down, and usually us here in San Antonio, we start to see them around now. So literally I had one come down, and I saw it in my own personal yard last Saturday, and I was excited because I was like, yes, they've made it again. And then there's over here, California, they have their own little area of butterflies that don't typically migrate. Some do, some have been recorded that some do, but in general, they just kind of migrate up and down here and then overwinter in the trees there in California. But so to kind of understand how do we know this, it's through the tagging process. We are citizen science. That's citizen scientists are basically people like you and me. We are helping the scientists get and collect data. How do we do this? By tagging butterflies. And how do you tag a butterfly? What is a tag? It's basically just a tiny little sticker that goes on the butterfly's wing. And it's been done, there's been a lot of research that has been done on exact placement. The chemicals that are used are non-toxic, so it causes no harm to the butterflies at all. But the placement is the most important part of it. That way it doesn't hinder any type of flight patterns or in trying to fly. It's really, really important. So it's in a part that's called the disco cell. And if you actually go to monarchwatch.org, they have really good specific instructions with pictures that show you exactly where it's supposed to go. And so, sorry about that, the wind is not cooperating today. And so that placement is really, really important so that you're not hindering any type of flight patterns or harming the butterfly as well. The proper way to hold it, it teaches you everything. And so once that's done, you release it, and this is how the patterns are learned and this is how the information gets to the scientists. So every single butterfly that's tagged, it makes its way down to where it's going. Some make it, some don't. But we know this because the tags are recovered from dead butterflies on the forest floor, and then they're given to the scientists. So the scientists here and in Canada and in Mexico, they all share the data, and then they know where that specific butterfly has actually come from. We know that it happens. I have tagged butterflies. I am the chief docent of our Monarch Butterfly and Pollinator Festival, and we have actually had 8 recovered from our festival alone. So we know that it does happen, and you can also do it, and you can learn how to tag. You can put, habitat in your yards to make sure that you have, enough there for them, whether it's nectar or whatever, and they can travel, and you can net them, or you can also raise them. There's many ways that you can become a citizen science, the things that you can do. You'll learn those things from attending classes like this, from going online and just learning everything that you can from other experts, or just simply going to Monarch Watch or Journey North, and you can learn the directions and the ways that you need to go. So how do we get that done? Well, when you first kind of think about what do you want to make sure that you have good habitat. And habitat is basically an area, big or small, even in a container. Believe it or not, you can have a little mini Monarch way station in container gardens on your patio. So just if you live in an apartment, that doesn't matter. You can still have it, and you can still draw in and help the monarch migration. During the fall migration, this is the most important time to actually have a lot of a lot of nectar plants, because they need that nectar to fuel up on, kind of fatten them up and get them carried on to their journey. It's a long way to Mexico. I mean, if you just from here, imagine just kind of jogging all the way to Mexico from here, you'd be pretty tired and hungry. So you want to have a stopover and have a view. So that's definitely what you would want for them. However, also milkweed. Native milkweeds are really important. One of the reasons why I can tell you native milkweeds are important is because those that are not, like the tropical milkweed here, it doesn't die back properly. So our native milkweeds, they naturally die back twice, sometimes more a year, or right when you plant them. So when you're first planting, they have to get established, and then they kind of die back, and then they grow back, and they kind of die back, and they grow back, and that is normal. This way, it is establishing itself, it's getting its roots established way down deep underground, and it's becoming a bigger and healthier plant. Even through maturity, our native milkweeds die back, typically through when we have really hot drought summers. This summer was a perfect example. It was really hot, barely any rain, and we've just now gotten some rain. And so our milkweeds naturally die back, and then they start growing back around now. And if we kind of come over here, I can show you an example of that, because we have it here in the Butterfly Learning Center, and we have several different types. And over here is the Zygopus milkweed. And this Zygopus milkweed, if we look right here, it has grown back, and it will grow up, and it'll be about this tall and about 1.5 feet wide. And that is normal. And the reason why is because it's gone through drought, but now as it's growing back, it's going to be healthy. It's going to be a healthy, clean milkweed. And what I mean by a healthy, clean milkweed is that it doesn't have an OE spore. So the OE spore is typically what's left on an infected monarch butterfly. And as it flutters over the plants to nectar or to lay eggs, then it drops these spores off of its scales of the wings. So what is OE? OE is a protozoan infection that kind of, or not infection, it's protozoan that attacks the monarch butterflies, and they host off of it. So as they're falling off in the scales, then when the eggs are laid, the caterpillar hatches, and it eats the eggshell, eats the plant, and then it itself becomes infected. So we want to make sure that we have clean milkweed, and by that dying back and then growing back new growth, we know that it is now clean without that protozoan spore on it. So I'm going to come right back up over here. And so we know that when we get native milkweeds, that native milkweeds aren't always the easiest to find, and sometimes we don't know which is which. So I brought a few examples here just to kind of show you how you can kind of tell and learn your native milkweeds, because that's really, really important to understand. One, get them from a reputable source that aren't going to have them either injected with pesticides or use sprayed on pesticides, so that your monarchs and your queens, because queens also use milkweed as their host plants, you want to make sure that it's free of all those pesticides so it doesn't harm either of them. So here I have, this is the zyzotes, and if you notice, this is, you know, kind of tall, and this is a 2-year-old plant already. So natives are going to grow a little bit shorter and smaller in pots because they can't grow their tap roots. And once they're put in the ground, then they kind of take off, and then they typically die back to finish those roots. But here you can kind of see it has little rounded leaves. And then this one here, the flowers come up in between on the stems. So the flower for this is white. And then over here, this is Texas milkweed. And so this is a little bit shorter. And this also has, you know, kind of short but rounded leaves, barely a little point, but the leaves are shorter. And this will get a little bit taller than this one. So you got to understand which ones grow taller and which ones grow shorter. And then if you look, I don't know if you can see, if it'll show up on camera, but see those aphids? Those aphids right there tell me that this is a healthy plant. Yes, I said this is a healthy plant. A lot of people get so freaked out over those aphids, and I promise you, you're not going to lose a plant to aphids. If you leave them alone, Mother Nature comes in and then they just have a smorgasbord all over that. So you have from lacewings to hoverflies to ladybugs and a skeleton, or I'm sorry, I can't think of it now. But there's lots of predators that come in and they eat them. So that's their meals. They eat them both in adult form and in larval form. So if you're spraying this with soapy water, or even just spraying it off with water to kind of get rid of them, you're not allowing the pheromone to kind of overpower it and invite those predators in for lunch. So it's been, you know, some people naturally are going to be like, I don't want it, it has that. But another good sign is that if it has aphids from wherever you're purchasing it from, then it's clean. There's no pesticide, which means it's okay if the caterpillars eat this. The saddest thing that happens is you get something, you're trying to provide something to bring in habitat, and then all of a sudden you wake up and then there's dead caterpillars, and that's kind of disappointing and frustrating and whatnot. So don't be afraid of those aphids. Over here I have a tropical milkweed. This is a non-native. This is one that typically gets sold as butterfly weed, and this is not the true butterfly weed. This is tropical milkweed, and the one that they usually want to say that it is the Esclepius Tuberosa. A few of the growers used to just call it butterfly weed, but now they're also labeling it as the Esclepius Tuberosa. So the best way that I can tell you, because it's kind of hard to ID plants unless you've learned it and you've seen it a lot in person, but if you are purchasing a plant that is this tall in a pot, then it is definitely not any type of Esclepius Tuberosa, because in a pot it doesn't get this big. so it's just understanding, if you have this already in your yards, then twice a year you're going to want to cut it back. You'll want to cut it back so that, again, as we get into that OE spore, it won't have that. It'll grow back and it'll be nice and fresh and clean for fall migration if you hurt any caterpillars. So speaking of that, a lot of people get confused and think that if they're migrating down, oh, we got a question.
We have a question. Somebody was asking, what is the purpose of aphids?
Meal. The purpose of aphids are a meal for our predators. So our healthy ecosystems have a reason for everything. Yes, aphids do drink some sap out of the juices out of the plants, but without them, other predators can't eat. So let's take ladybug larvae, for example. They have to eat it. The adult ladybugs also eat it, and then something in turn usually eats them as well. So it's a natural whole food chain, and everything serves a purpose. But the good thing about seeing the aphids on milkweed is that, or really any other plant, that means you have a plant that has not been sprayed with any type of pesticide or injected with any type of pesticide. And when I say injected, there are pesticides that are injected into the plant, and then it can never be, gotten rid of. And those are called neonicotinoids. So those are things that you want to look in and make sure that you don't have them. The big box chains, they will sell them that are injected with that, and you can't get rid of it no matter what you do. And then you've wasted your money on something that even the pollen or even the nectar that's coming in it has that neonicotinoid in it. So it's not just killing any pest, it's indirectly killing everything else as well. And so that's one of the important things is for the aphids is that one, you have a healthy plant. And I lost my train of thought of what I was going on with that. And anyway, with the migration, there we go, back to the migration of when they are migrating down, typically they are going straight to Mexico and fueling up, and they lead a lot of nectar right now. But you do get a few that will break dormancy and lay eggs. That means either the male and the female that have mated as they were coming down, they will not continue their journey. They will die, but all of their babies will be the ones that, when they finish through, they will continue the journey and go down to Mexico. Now, how many make it? How many make it even to an adult butterfly? Only 1 out of every 100 eggs laid make it to a complete butterfly as an adult. So what could be some of those reasons? Lots of reasons, and mainly us. We're mainly the reasons. And it's from habitat loss, from using pesticides, from not understanding how habitats go, cars as they fly, and that could be splattered on your windshield, unfortunately. There's lots of predators, but for the monarchs, if a predator were to eat it, it's not going to do it again, because the sap that is in the milkweed is toxic. And so they eat it, and then they themselves also become toxic. And so as a predator eats it, it's going to throw up, and it is not going to ever want to do that again. And then it kind of puts it into the memory of all of its children, ooh, we don't want to do that. So from the color of the caterpillar and the butterfly, they will actually remember, ooh, we don't want to do that. So sometimes one has to take one for the team, and then they all learn, yep, we don't want to do that again. So typically predation of being eaten is not generally a problem, but it is with habitat loss, and that's basically with us. And so if we actually just kind of come in and do our parts, and since we as humans take out of the ecosystem, if we put back in, then we can create more habitat and provide for them. The main thing that they need right now is nectar, but in my own personal opinion, you can never have enough milkweed. So planting milkweed spring and fall, that way you have enough, because if they're there, it's already too late. You needed to have it already done. I mean, it's not too late. You can always purchase more, but typically the plants aren't going to be big enough to hold caterpillars through a whole life cycle. So you want to plant them all and get them all established in, and that way in spring when they come up, they definitely are ready to be eaten upon. Yes?
Drake, Catherine is asking, how many generations to complete the migration?
So we have 5 generations. And what I mean by generations is basically when the monarchs mate in spring, they come up to Texas and they lay their eggs. That's the first generation. And so all of those grow and become adult butterflies. And as they journey up, they go up to the next couple of states and they lay eggs. That's the second generation. And so it's only the 5th generation that actually migrates south. So that's the miracle of the whole journey, is that how do they know that? Because it's not unlike birds. They know the pattern through their parents. They follow the parents, or they follow the family that kind of flock together. And this is something that scientists are still stunned upon, on like, how do they know this? How is it that, you know, one is born in Texas and then it flies up and it lays eggs and it's probably going to die. And it's not going to make that cold. It's only that last generation, which is the 5th generation. They sometimes call it the Methuselah generation, the super monarch, all kinds of different names for it. But you can also tell when it actually emerges from its chrysalis, you can see that it's much bigger, it's darker, and it's just a little bit more robust. And it has to be to make a journey like that all the way from Canada down to Mexico, even from San Antonio to Mexico. That's a long journey. I couldn't do it just walking, let alone flapping those little wings. That's kind of like running. It's a long journey. So yeah, it's 5 generations, and it's the miracle of it that, wow, how did they learn that? What is it in them? Scientists believe that some of it is the magnetic pull, the way the sun kind of travels around, but we really don't know for sure. These are all kind of speculation on how it happens, but it's a miracle, and it's definitely joyous. When you see it and you're like, ah, they're here again, it's just kind of like, yay, they made it. And why is it so important? Well, because there are pollinators, and we want to protect and keep our pollinators going. So I encourage many people to find out habitat and find out what habitat is, find out what plants you would need and what you would like to put into your habitat for these creatures of all kinds. Because once you start planting for one, you kind of indirectly plant for everything, from birds to bees to lizards to frogs to whatever. You provide a healthy ecosystem, and they all come in, and it makes it a little happy place. And so, yes.
Pamela says her native milkweeds come up too late for the spring migration. Is there something she could do to help them come up sooner?
No, so typically it's the types of milkweed that you get. So our first usual milkweed that springs up and shows itself first is the antelope horns. So those will show first, and then as those are kind of out, then the next ones around April or so will be the tuberosa, the butterfly weed, and then also during that time will be the zyzotes and the texana here in our area. In other places, it's different. Obviously, if you're up in Michigan somewhere, then it's going to be later in the year because it's still probably snow on the ground during that time. So it's knowing what kind. If you have planted, you have to know when their bloom time is. So if their bloom time is in April, that means probably about 4 weeks prior to that is when they're going to start to pop up. So it's just understanding what you have and if you have enough of it. So what I mean by have enough of it, if you have 1 or 2 plants, that helps, but it's not going to be really enough to kind of give that whole population. Typically, I like to think of, if you think of things, 1 plant feeds 1 caterpillar. So have multiple plants. How many do you make sure you have enough food? And if you know, and if you have multiple choices. So if you have native milkweeds, you're not going to have instant gratification with certain types. You have to be patient with your, if you planted the tuberosa, that you have to be patient more with that. So maybe try the Texas milkweed or the Taylioti. These 2 in particular will give you first year blooms. Taylotis will give you first year blooms and first year seed pods. This one takes about 2 years to give you seed pods, but you will get first year blooms. And you will get multiple seed pods after your first year of establishment, because typically when you're getting them, they're about at least 1 year to 2 years old in their pots. So by the time that you put them in, the Taylotis, it will give you seed pods twice in the year right away. But it does take every bit of 2 years for the Texas milkweed to give you seed pods, but you will get blooms right away. The other milkweeds take a little bit longer. It can take anywhere from 2 to 3 years for you to even get blooms. So you have to understand how the natives grow, how long that it takes. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see people get frustrated with is that they plant it and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks later it dies. And then they pull it out and they're like, it dies, I have no luck with it. And it's like, no, it's actually getting established. It's first season with you, and when I say by season, it means a whole year. From spring to the next spring, that's a season. It's not typical like our seasons, there's 4 seasons, but seasons for plants are different. You have to allow them to get themselves established, and every time that it dies back, it's growing those root systems, and then it grows a little bit again, and then it dies back again. And sometimes you might not even see anything for a year. I promise you, it's not dead. It's going to come up and show you in all of its glory how pretty it is. You just have to be patient in knowing what types that typically do that longer. So your tuberosa and your antelope horns, that's typical of those, and just plant some other ones that you'll get that instant gratification with, and then just put lots of nectar plants so that they can be all in between, and you get lots of flowers and butterflies and bees and all that, so you feel that, I'm still providing, but I'm learning my patience on the native milkweeds, because it's typical for them to die back and grow back and die back, and sometimes not show themselves for quite a while, and then just boom, here I am. Do we have any other questions?
No, one person said, thank you, I have several milkweed in my yard and have had several caterpillars in the spring. Love butterfly gardening.
Yay! Good. Hopefully you'll continue to add more to it, and that all the things that you're providing, just remember it's a healthy ecosystem, and the more you plant, the more that moves in. So from birds to spiders to whatnot, it all serves a purpose. And I thank you. Yeah, thank you for providing and doing that. And yes.
I actually have a question. Should you provide water for butterflies?
So yes, so typically when you're starting a habitat, you want to think of what is a habitat. A habitat is a place that provides shelter, food, and water, and a place to raise their young. Those are the things that you want to think about. So when you're saying food, it's food for both nectar and host plants. Host plant is a plant that provides the feeding for the larval stage. So the adult butterfly will come and she will lay her eggs, and then the egg will hatch, and then the caterpillar will eat the leaves. A nectar plant is obviously the flower provides nectar for the adult butterfly and for other nectar using insects or birds such as hummingbirds. And then the shelter is basically the plants, as they're kind of in between, it shelters the area, so it hides them from predators, it hides them from weather, it hides and it protects them. So the shelter is important too, and that's why you want to nectar and host plants together. It will kind of shelter in between. And then the water, yes, you can definitely leave water for them. If you decide to leave water or any type of moisture, another thing that you could do is create a puddle patch. And a puddle patch it's just simple, something that's a damp area either on the ground or some rocks and sand mixed together, and it's moist, and they can come in and they can collect minerals and water. Or if you're leaving just water, be sure to fill it with rocks and to where the water is not coming above those rocks. You don't want to actually have an accident and have anything drown. Any type of bees or anything like that that's coming to get some of that water, they can stand on the rocks and then sip up the water as they need it. But yes, it's definitely important to leave somewhere some water around. Any other questions?
No questions at this moment. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to say so in the comments. You know, we will be able to read them out so Drake can address them.
So what I'm going to kind of do is just kind of walk about and show some of the things here that are nectar sources. And right now is definitely, for fall migration, nectar is one of the most important things. Yes, plant your milkweed, but they need to be able to swoop in and get, you know, some good nectar to give them that energy to continue on with that journey. One of the plants that we have here, this here is called Clammy Weed, and this is a popular one, and it is a good nectar source, and it is also a good native, easy to grow. And another one we have, this one's kind of short right now, but sunflowers. Monarchs actually love sunflower nectar. They'll be on it, and this is not typical of your common sunflower. This one, for whatever reason, is kind of short, but these get every bit of 6 to 7 foot tall. But that's a really great nectar source for them. Another good one here is the Salvia gregorii. This is a good nectar source even for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds absolutely love this, but it's a great nectar source for the monarchs as well. And I'm going to come back up over this way and some of the here, passion flower. This is passion flower, and they absolutely love this nectar as well. This is a 2-for-1. This here is not just only a great nectar source, but it's also a host plant for 4 different butterflies. So we have the Gulf fritillary, which is the most common that you see here, and then the zebra longwing, the variegated fritillary, and also the Julia. So those 4 butterflies actually use that as a host plant here in San Antonio. So it's a great nectar source, but it's also a bonus host plant as well. Here we have, this is senna, velvet leaf senna, Lindheimer senna, and this is a nice, soft, pretty little plant, but it is a great nectar source. And this is also the host plant for the sulfur butterflies. The most common that you will get typically here in San Antonio is the sleepy orange sulfur. But there's also the giant sulfur and some other sulfurs that we use it, but the most common is the sulfur butterfly.
I have a question. Larry would like to know, how do butterflies mate?
How do butterflies mate? So typically they'll do a little dance. They'll kind of, the females will kind of sit somewhere and the males will come up over them and they kind of flutter over them, and sometimes they'll entangle into the air and do this special little dance. And then the female either says, yeah, I like you, or I don't. And how that happens and how she decides is on the males, they have these little pheromone scent sacs that are on their wings. And so as they're fluttering, she decides, does he smell good or not? Do I like him? Does he seem worthy enough to be mating with? And that's basically how he kind of entices her. And then if she accepts, then they couple up and they will mate. The males smell different. Even us as humans can kind of smell them. So if you've ever gone to a tagging demo or been tagged one yourself, or if you're going to be tagging and you see a male, if you actually kind of just smell it, they have a very each one has a different unique scent, and if we can smell it, how potent is it to the female? So they can smell it much more than we can. The monarchs, they can actually like smell their host plant from within a 20-mile radius. So they have some really potent senses to know that what that smell is and where things are at. So yeah, the males, they each kind of, if you're doing it, try it, because it's kind of cool to be. I had one that actually smelled like cocoa, and then one that smelled like dirt. So if I were a monarch female, I would be like, oh yeah, I'm going for the one that smells like chocolate. The next plant that I want to talk about that I absolutely love is frostweed. Frostweed is here in San Antonio, this is the main choice of nectar. If you have this in your habitat, then you will most likely be a roosting stop. They will definitely be there and nectar up on this. This is all getting ready to bloom. It blooms out white flowers, and then it will also, during how it got its name, frostweed, is that it actually splits at the seam when we have a freeze, and it creates these beautiful, the sap and water inside create these beautiful ribbons of frost and ice. So if you have this, you'll get to see it happen during our first, if we're lucky enough to get a freeze. You know how it is here in San Antonio. But this also is a host plant. So you will get caterpillars on this for the bordered patch butterfly. But this is definitely one of the main nectar sources for the monarchs during migration. If you have this, you'll come out, they'll just be draped all over it, just ready to drink it all up and continue their journey into Mexico, down to Mexico. And if you have this, make sure that you have the space. This can get every bit of 5 to 6 foot tall. And typically, when I have it in my habitats, and I typically, come June 1st, I'll cut it in half. Sometimes I cut it down to 6 inches from the dirt. That way it stays about this high once it grows back. Here we haven't really had the chance to maintain anything because of COVID. So these have actually just kind of stayed shorter naturally. Because it's been drought, there hasn't been a lot of watering or care going on. But sometimes they just take off, and as you can kind of maybe see here, how this kind of just fell over and then started growing back up. So if you don't want to get it too long and leggy, if you don't want it to get that way, then you can just trim it back. And typically I do that around June 1st, cut it at least in half so that you can keep it at a good height. But this frostweed is #1 nectar source. Yes?
I have a question. Wanda asked, where can she get plants like antelope horn and dessert?
So there's several different, you can ask and see if they have them at Rainbow Gardens. You can, Shades of Green may have, carry some. The Nectar Bar definitely has native milkweed. So it's just checking, and make sure that you ask someone. Make sure that you ask, hey, if you find them there, make sure that you ask that they're not sprayed with pesticides. And they themselves may not, but they want to make sure that they call the people that they've gotten them from to see if they've sprayed them. Because I know that there's been a couple of times where it has nothing to do with the actual nurseries here, and then they find out later that, oh yeah, that happened and it was a mistake. So just make sure that they know where they're getting it from, so that you know that you're not putting things in that are toxic for our butterflies. Yep, so if you just kind of create habitat, this here is all kinds of, there's different ways, from mostly here to, believe it or not, you can grow things in shade. So this all area right here is mostly shade, 90% shade through the whole day, and we still have plenty of things that are growing. And then over here we have the areas that are more sun, or get partial sun, so they'll get maybe 6 hours of sun, and then it rotates around and it gets shade for the rest of the day. So no matter what you have, you can still grow things that are good for the monarchs during their migration. Crossbeak grows typically in shady areas, but it can also grow in full sun. And so there's lots of things that you can still grow. One of the things I want to show here, this here is Taylioti milkweed vine. I want to talk a little bit about milkweed vines, because milkweed vines, there's only 2 that have been recorded that the monarchs actually use. And the Taylioti milkweed vine is one, and then there's fringed twine vine. Those are the 2 that have been recorded and documented that they actually use. The special thing about the Taylioti milkweed vine is that it's the only milkweed in the United States that the soldier butterfly can actually use. They here, when we get them, they're a rare stray, but they do come usually every 4 years or so. We'll get them, fly in, and if you have that, then that would be a larval host for them. Typically, they'll be in a sexual diapause, but they do break during that, and then that's what they'll use. They can't use anything else. You can't even switch them. If you were to switch them to another milkweed, they won't survive. So that's the 2 that are the Taylioti milkweed vine and the fringed twine vine. Those are the 2 milkweeds that are used by the monarch. But there's also pearl milkweed vine that we typically have here as well. So, and then obviously in other places of the United States, there's other milkweed vines that they would use. But for San Antonio, those are the 2 that are used here. But yeah, I thought we had a butterfly going by. How lucky would that have been? But we also have some, let me see if we have some here growing up. We have Texas milkweed, which has gone dormant here because we had a really long summer, long and hot, and that's typical. So the more water that it gets, it'll bounce back. So don't be afraid if you've planted milkweed and it goes dormant. It's not dead. I promise you, it's not dead. Do we have another question?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Yep. So through all your plantings, and make a list. Just make a list. I'm going to share some of the lists that I think is a good start if you're just starting, and then you can put it on to the web page. And then I also have, if you have little ones that like to color, I have a coloring page as well, so you can go there and have that, print that off, and they can color their monarch butterfly for the migration too. Again, if you have any type of questions, if you want to learn more, continue educational classes like this, go to monarchwatch.org, Journey North. Google can be your best friend. Ask people. You can ask sources like the Native Plant Society, the Texas Naturalist. There's plenty of organizations that can lead you to the right people in the right direction. You can definitely ask, even after this, ask them a question, and I'll answer the best that I can. I'll go through and see see if new questions have popped up even after this, and I'll answer those questions for you. Anything else?
I think it's all the questions we've had so far.
All right. So again, I thank you so much for joining us today. Having your morning spent with us is really appreciated, and thank you for your time. And I guess until next time, peace, love, and butterflies.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Like Drake said, she will send us those handouts, and about a week from now we will post this video on our website to live forever, and we will have those downloads available. So go to philharbigerpark.org to check out to see when that video gets posted, and also you can go and explore some of our other live events that we have done. We have a section called virtual nature talk recordings, and you can go and see other talks that have occurred this year as well. Thank you. Have a great weekend.